Have you ever wondered why the woman who slips away in silence is the one he can never forget? Not the woman who screamed when she was hurt. Not the one who demanded closure, who begged to be understood, who traced her pain into messages he never answered. No, it's the woman who left without dramatics, without chaos, without a war. The one who disappeared softly, like dusk dissolving into night. She's the one who lives in the back of his mind like a secret he was never allowed to keep. Carl Jung would tell you, it's not just about her. It's about what she awakens. The woman who vanishes softly disturbs something archetypal in a man. She activates the anima, the deep, inner feminine he has not yet met within himself. Her presence is not just beauty or kindness. It's echo, depth, mystery, a pull not into her body, but into the forgotten rooms of his own psyche. She doesn't threaten him with anger. She threatens him with stillness. Because the modern man, raised on external validation and emotional detachment, knows how to handle noise. He can explain it, dismiss it, label it as overreaction. But what he can't handle is her absence, her unspoken decision to leave the stage, to step out of the script he thought she would play forever. And it's not because she didn't love him. It's because she did with clarity. You see, a woman like her doesn't vanish to punish. She vanishes because she's seen enough, because her soul has registered something her mouth never needs to say. And once she knows, she doesn't negotiate with what she already understands. So she walks, not out of anger, but out of alignment. And in doing so, she leaves behind a space he cannot name. A space filled not with memories, but with possibility. The future version of himself he refused to step into, the man she saw beneath the mask, the one he was not ready to become. This is what haunts him. Not her scent, not her voice, not the way she moved, though he may think so at first. What haunts him is the unfinished version of himself that her love quietly required. The version he turned away from when he couldn't meet her in the mirror she held up with her gaze. She never asked for promises, never begged for potential. She simply reflected. And when he turned away from that reflection, when he chose the familiar safety of his emotional distance over the vulnerable edge of transformation, she didn't plead. She didn't linger. She vanished, like wind slipping through his fingers, like a truth he almost understood but let go of too soon. And now he obsesses, not over her body, but over the space she once held. The way she made silence feel sacred. The way her presence exposed everything that was false in his performance. The way she remained calm even in his confusion, because she wasn't trying to win him. She was simply choosing herself. And that, above all, is what his ego can't resolve. She didn't fight for him, not because he wasn't worth it, but because she was. Because somewhere deep inside her, the feminine knew, chasing a man through his indecision is a ritual of self-abandonment. And she was done betraying herself for love. So she left in the most devastating way a woman can, with grace. And now he walks through rooms filled with noise and clamor and distraction. But none of it sounds like her. None of it feels like her. The women who come after try to love him in ways he's used to, loud, giving, endless. But he doesn't crave endlessness anymore. He craves the boundary she became when she left. He craves the taste of the sacred she carried in her detachment. He obsesses over the fact that she didn't make him her home. And in her leaving, she forced him to sit with his own emptiness. And now, he is left wandering through the architecture of his own mind, halls echoing with the ghost of her presence. Not because she was louder than the rest, but because she was truer. There's a peculiar kind of hunger that grows in a man after he's tasted depth, but wasn't ready to stay. It's not the hunger of possession, of ownership, or control. It's the hunger for meaning, for the feeling he once held in his hands, but couldn't name, couldn't claim. That feeling was her, or rather, what she awakened inside him. The woman who vanishes softly doesn't vanish from the world, only from his. She continues blooming elsewhere, rooted in her own becoming. But for him, her absence takes shape. It has a texture, a color, a sound. It becomes a presence in itself, the echo of stillness he rejected, the mirror he turned away from, the light he wasn't brave enough to walk into. Jung called this the return of the anima, through the unconscious, the woman reappearing, not in form, but in dream, in projection, in every half-hearted connection that follows. Because until he faces the wound her silence revealed, he will continue to chase what he cannot catch, the version of himself she saw and waited for, until she no longer could. And you, the woman who left quietly, you may wonder if he ever noticed your absence. You may question whether your grace went unseen, your boundary misunderstood. You may ache, not because you still want him, but because a part of you hoped he'd rise into the man you believed he could be. But hear this, the feminine that walks away from misalignment doesn't go unseen. She becomes unforgettable. Because you didn't just leave a relationship. You left a pattern. You interrupted a loop that's been playing out inside him for years. You didn't beg to be chosen. You chose yourself. And that choice, that self-reverence, that is the sound that keeps him up at night. He can't explain it, not even to himself. It's not that you were the most affectionate or the most available. It's that you were the most awake. You were the moment he was invited into wholeness, and he blinked. You see, the masculine is magnetized by the woman who holds the paradox, soft but boundaried, nurturing but self-possessed, inviting but unmoved by games. She doesn't argue. She doesn't prove. She knows. And that knowing is what breaks him open. Because for once, someone saw him, truly saw him, and didn't try to mold him, didn't try to save him, simply offered him the space to meet himself. And when he couldn't, she didn't lower her standard. She didn't dim her light. She simply disappeared into her own evolution. That's what he obsesses over. Not the comfort of her presence, but the clarity of her departure. Not her body, but the integrity it walked away with. And now, no matter how many arms he falls into, there will be a part of him that searches the ceiling at night, remembering the woman who didn't try to convince him to stay. The woman who met his detachment with dignity. The woman who, without saying a word, told him everything he needed to hear. I won't become smaller, just so you feel bigger beside me. That sentence will haunt him more than any goodbye ever could. Because it wasn't rejection, it was revelation. She saw him, not just as he was, but as he could be. And instead of demanding he become that man, she simply walked away when he didn't. And now she exists in the mythos of his psyche. She becomes story, symbol, shadow. Not the villain, the lost chance. The missed moment. The spiritual reckoning that slipped through his fingers like smoke. You, who vanished softly, did not vanish at all. You became the ache he carries in his chest, not for you, but for the version of himself that only your presence ever called forth. And this is why she lingers. Not in photographs or messages or the physical remnants of shared time, but in the invisible spaces, in the silence between heartbeats, in the long pause between lovers, in the soft unease that creeps into his chest when another woman looks at him with eyes that admire, but do not see, because she saw him, not the curated self, not the practiced charm. She saw the boy inside the man, aching to be held, terrified to be exposed, unwilling to soften. And she didn't recoil. She didn't flinch. She didn't fill the silence with validation. She offered presence, still unwavering, real. And when he failed to meet it, she let him go, not as punishment, as proof. Proof that love is not sacrifice. That love does not mean staying for the potential of a man who won't rise into his own. That feminine power is not in how long she waits, but in how softly she can leave once she knows. And oh, how softly she left. No rage, no demands, no lectures or ultimatums. She simply stopped giving her energy to where it wasn't honored. And that is what devastates him. Not the loss of access, but the loss of being chosen by someone who didn't need him, but wanted to meet him fully. Someone who offered intimacy without entanglement. Someone who loved him without losing herself. She left in silence, but her silence spoke more truth than all the pleading women before her. Because it wasn't withdrawal out of fear, it was withdrawal in wisdom. It was a full-bodied knowing that staying would mean betraying her own spirit. That trying to wake a man who's still asleep in his ego is a futile war. She didn't want to fight. She wanted reverence. And when he couldn't offer that, she stepped away, not into loneliness, but into sovereignty, into the sacred feminine space where she no longer confuses being wanted with being seen, where her love is not a currency to be earned, but a gift offered only to the one who has done the inner work to hold it. And now, no matter how many paths he walks, her footprints remain, not as reminders of loss, but as echoes of possibility, the version of himself he could have become if he had followed her into depth instead of running back into distraction. He obsesses not because he lost a woman. He obsesses because he glimpsed a threshold and walked away. A threshold into emotional maturity, into presence, into the kind of love that cannot be performed, only embodied. And you, dear listener, if you've ever been this woman, understand this. Your leaving was never a failure. It was your initiation. Your soft exit was an act of power, a prayer answered not with words, but with action. You became the mirror he could not break. You became the flame he could not hold. You became the story he will tell himself in fragments. Each time he wonders why the ones who come after never feel quite the same. It was never your job to teach him to see. It was your role to be. And when he couldn't meet you there, not in emotion, not in honesty, not in wholeness, we didn't beg him to. You met yourself instead. And that is what haunts him. Not because he was abandoned, but because you abandoned nothing in yourself for him. You stood tall, even as you disappeared. And that is a kind of power few men ever recover from. There is a sacred silence a woman steps into when she no longer doubts her value. When the noise of proving, pleading, and performing dissolves into stillness. And in that stillness, she hears the truth. He was never confused, only unwilling. He knew what she was. He felt at the moment she walked in, not because of what she wore or what she said, but because of the weight of her presence. She did not enter to be consumed. She entered as if she had already found herself. There is nothing more disruptive to the ego than a woman who does not need to be rescued, especially by a man still seeking salvation in the approval of others. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was asking to be met. And when he couldn't rise, when he remained in the liminal space between want and will, she didn't force him forward. She let him drift. She let him return to the safety of his distractions, the arms of women who asked for less, the emotional shallows where he never had to face his own soul. But still she lingers, because a woman who walks away softly carries with her a kind of poetic finality. She doesn't slam the door. She simply no longer waits in the hallway. Her footsteps fade, and only then does he realize that her silence is not absence. It is arrival into a version of herself where she no longer performs for love, no longer offers healing to those who refuse to bleed honestly. This is the point where his obsession deepens, not because she plays games, but because she doesn't, because her leaving was not a tactic, but a truth. She wasn't trying to provoke him. She was honoring herself, and he feels that in the marrow, in the moment when the crowd clears, when the thrill fades, and none of the new voices carry the same resonance. The anima, the feminine archetype buried deep in his unconscious, awakens again, and she has her face, her voice, her silence. But the anima is not memory, is longing, is the call to wholeness disguised as desire. And because he has not faced her within himself, he projects her onto every woman who echoes even the faintest trace of the one who walked away. He doesn't want to lose her again, so he clutches at reflections, at silhouettes, but they're never quite her, because she was not just a person, she was a portal. She was the moment he could have chosen expansion, and he knows that now. Now, he's no longer haunted by what they had. He's haunted by what they didn't. The conversations they never had because he kept things surface. The vulnerability he withheld while she quietly offered hers. The apology he never spoke because pride was louder than love. The commitment he flirted with but never honored. And now, her shadow is everywhere, but she is not. She lives in his quiet moments, in the woman he imagines when he's bored, in the part of him that knows, I had something real and I wasn't ready. But she's not waiting. She has become more than the woman he knew. She has gone deeper. The woman who leaves softly doesn't go backwards. She doesn't second guess. She doesn't reopen doors for men who stood in the doorway too long. She walks forward, not in rebellion, but in reverence. Reverence for her own peace, her own worth, her own future. And in doing so, she becomes mythic, not in the sense of fantasy, but in essence. She becomes the lesson, the crossroads, the aching never quite puts to rest. Not because she hurt him, but because she healed herself in front of him and didn't ask him to follow. And now he walks with the awareness that not all women are meant to stay. Some are meant to show you what you are still too afraid to become. And once they've done that, they vanish. Softly, powerfully, permanently. And when she's gone, truly gone, something in him breaks. But not loudly. It's a quiet kind of breaking. The kind that happens in the smallest moments. The kind that creeps into a man like fog under a door. A song he hears unexpectedly. A familiar scent on a stranger's coat. A place they never went but once talked about. And suddenly, the ghost of her returns. But it's not her that returns. It's the part of himself he abandoned in her presence. The softness he denied. The truth he ignored. The path he refused to walk. Because she wasn't only a woman. She was a mirror. A map. A chance. And he let it pass. Carl Jung warned of this. The man who mistakes the outer feminine for the inner anima. Who pursues women not to love them, but to claim some lost piece of himself. Who obsesses, not because she left, but because she represented a kind of wholeness he had not yet cultivated. She became his symbol, and he mistook that symbol for safety. But symbols aren't meant to be captured. They're meant to lead us inward, and he never went inward. So now he lives in echo. He seeks her in others, yet finds only reflections. Not because she was perfect, but because she was whole. And she required a man who was willing to do the same. To become whole, not through performance or pursuit, but through the death of illusion. The woman who vanishes softly is the one who loved cleanly. Who didn't try to manipulate. Who didn't try to save. Who didn't lose herself in the labyrinth of his indecision. She saw him, and when he wouldn't see her back, truly see her, she left. Not in anger, in completion. And that completion is what he obsesses over. It is the thing he cannot touch. Because she didn't just walk away, she closed the loop. She made peace with what was, and by doing so, took back every thread of herself that had once been tangled in him. And now, she walks in power. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that posts pictures to prove she's moved on. The kind that doesn't need to prove it all. The kind that is rooted, soft, grounded, sacred. She is the kind of woman who doesn't chase men. She calls them into themselves. And if they don't come, she continues. Because she knows her worth is not up for negotiation. Because she knows love is not meant to be begged for. Because she understands now that anyone who needs her to be less, to wait, to shrink, to tolerate, is not worthy of the woman she fought so hard to become. So he obsesses, and she evolves. She becomes the woman who no longer breaks herself into smaller pieces to be loved by those who fear depth. She becomes the kind of woman whose peace is her power, whose silence is not emptiness, but elevation. And when she does speak again, not to him, but to the world, her voice carries weight. The weight of a woman who left with grace and never looked back. And that is her final gift to him. Not revenge, not bitterness, distance. Distance that reminds him every single day that he had a choice and he hesitated. And while he waits for her echo to return, she is already gone, already rising, already rooted in a life where her love is matched, not mourned. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.